Hi, I'm just going to start my presentation now. So thanks for joining my session of what product managers should never do. You're just going to be doing a quick intro, just give you some context about my background, and we're going to be digging deep into what product managers should never do, giving you many examples of this, and most importantly, what they should do instead. And we'll be wrapping it up with a Q&A session. So I'm Pete. I am a PM at Twilio. I lead the self-service onboarding user experience at Twilio, and I have 10 plus years of experience doing product management and working on marketing aspects as well. And my primary focus has been data, SaaS, travel, finance, and real estate. Within those, my products have always been related to growth, driving growth in the company, be it revenue or KPIs. And I've also worked on a variety of internationalization projects. In terms of fun fact, an interesting fun fact is I didn't speak any Japanese or Chinese prior to moving to the countries and then picked it up on the job. If you want to learn more about me, you can check it out on my bit.ly link, which I'll be sharing at the end as well. So I'd like to share this quote with you. There are no secrets to success. It is the result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure. And this is the very essence of this session. There are a lot of fun and exciting parts of product management, but there are also parts that will lead to definitive failure. And I would like to share with my decade of experience how to avoid those key parts of failure that will just make your job a lot more fun and a lot more fulfilling. So what product managers should never do, but we're all at some point in their career, we're micromanagers, data obsessed, or stubborn. Some have been all three, some have only just one or two of these. But either way, you definitely don't want to be any of these three things. And again, I'll be giving some examples. So let's start with the first example. Don't micromanage. So you've probably heard about this from a product management perspective. You align goals, you define scope, you assign work, you set deadlines, and you have regular syncs with your stakeholders. That sounds all really normal, and that is definitely part of the job. In high level, you're basically chasing, you're reviewing, and you're advising your stakeholders. But the results of this is actually you build a shell of an MVP. Usually when you're launching a product, you just don't have the timing or the resources to actually launch everything within what you imagined. So it actually becomes an MVP, a minimal viable product. And as a result, a lot of things that you were planning to build, you actually don't build because you just don't have enough resources. So you build the bare minimum, and that bare minimum actually becomes less than the bare minimum, mainly because you're spending a lot of time fighting scope, learning about new roadblocks that are going to push your deadlines further out. And you realize, okay, well, I can actually probably compromise with these things and follow back up with your stakeholders and just cut scope, cut scope, cut scope. Eventually, like I said, your beautiful house becomes this house on the right, and you also experience some degree of burnout. And this becomes a very vicious cycle because at the end of the day, you constantly are fighting to make sure that all the roadblocks are being cleared and what you're trying to deliver is trying to be as close to what you originally imagined. But at the end of the day, it becomes like this, the shell of an MVP. So as a real life example, I was once working on a three-sided platform and it had endless dependencies. As an example, within one of the things I was doing for this platform, I was trying to actually have a new piece of data that would allow three sides of the platform to actually move more efficiently. So in any platform that you build, you're trying to match usually a supply with demand, and you connect those two types of users so that they can enjoy some benefit your platform provides. In my case, I had three sides. So that basically meant we had three groups of support, three groups of engineers, three groups of designers, et cetera, et cetera. And creating an extra field to help track across all three seems relatively simple, except when you factor in things like rights access or data privacy or sync times. For example, one team would see the data, but then there would be some delay before another team would see the data. So all this actually adds up to what I was pointing out at the beginning, which is scope tends to just start creeping up on you. And also the MVP that you imagine, just tracking one extra field, seems to be very far into the future. And basically you have to come up with other ways to do the same thing you wanted to do. So it led to constant chasing, constant back and forth, constant advising, constant review of things. Oh, okay, now I'll have to look at all the data schemas of everything that feeds into the same database. I'll have to look at the timing of everything that happens. So basically a lot of chasing and a lot of follow-up.
Hi,
So
Pete.
don't micro.
Sorry to interrupt. I think we're not able to see your slides change. I don't know if your screen is frozen, but I just wanted to point it out before you continue.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Are you able to see the slide?
No, it's not
Says
moving. Maybe try
reshare.
resharing it. Yeah, your screen again. It could
Thank
be
you.
just, so, yeah, no problem. Apologies. Sorry for the interruption.
Not a problem. Thanks for the heads up.
Mhm.
Is this visible?
Yes.
Okay. So let me make
Mhm.
sure. Did everyone get to see this slide? Let me just to
No,
make sure.
I
Okay.
think we
So
missed the
again, these are
first few ones. Yeah.
got it. I will just jump through the slides just to make sure that everything I was saying was actually linked to what people are seeing. So again, these are the three things product managers should never be. This is the example I was talking about. This is the results of following that normal product management mindset / technique. I was giving the real life example of the three-sided platform I was working on. And I was now about to go into what a product manager should do. So don't micromanage, instead be coercively communal. And the actions to do this they sound relatively easy, but there's a lot of aspects to them. So from a action perspective, the best thing you can do is to sell a system. And the system should have very clear boundaries and transparent roles. And what that means is you first, at the most basic level, need to reframe everything for them. So as a product manager, you will reach out to a variety of stakeholders. You will have to try to get them on board. You are not their direct managers. You are not directly linked to that department or group. And basically, they're at a fundamental level, they're doing a favor for you. So the easiest thing to do is actually reframe the entire situation for them. So even if your project does 100% different things for everybody, you focus on that 10% or that 15% that is the most relevant for that group. And as a result, the team is more likely to actually follow up on exactly what you're asking for versus, hey, we're launching this new awesome thing called X, and X will kind of help your team, but the real focus is actually all this 90% of the stuff. Instead, you want to just say, hey, we're launching X and it does exactly this for your team. And we are planning to make sure that over its iterations, it helps your team in these factors. And that reframing makes a very big difference because that also allows you to delegate everything. What that means is if you find a team manager, so the people who usually contribute to your product or project are going to be the ones that are going to be diligently taking time from their daily work to help you with your project. But you actually want to delegate to their managers because their managers will actually help you with the chasing aspect of things and the reviewing aspect of things. As I mentioned earlier, there's the chasing, there's the reviewing, and there's advising. You want to stick to advising as much as possible. The chasing and the reviewing can actually be done by their managers, and that actually saves you time from a efficiency perspective as well, because not only can they take care of the timelines for you, but they can actually do the last thing, which is conditional alerts. So by setting up everything up in the beginning with putting a lot of more time into the focus on whether or not they have interest in your product or feature, they can actually have full transparency of, okay, this is actually going to be shifting everything out probably 2 weeks. Or, okay, we don't actually have the resourcing for this because I'm the manager and I know what products that or projects they're working on right now. And we just don't have the capacity. We thought we did, but we don't. So the conditional alerts, once you set those rules with the team managers in advance, you can actually be alerted to actually review if you really need to. But just like engineers have pager duty or factory workers have some sort of tolerance for alarms when one of the machines goes down for X number of minutes or hours, you have the same situation. Unless it really is going to shift all your deadlines out, or unless their resourcing changes, they're going to be responsible for actually adjusting for that. And you'll always not have to actually manage that. You'll just be aware if it's going to happen. So the result of this is you become more of a sage. Again, out of those three things, chasing, reviewing, and advising, you just follow more of the advising role. If you front load all the work by adjusting and reframing the entire product or project or feature to match that group, it becomes a lot easier because they'll just come to you when there's an error, so to speak, not when there's something to review in terms of, oh, the data schema doesn't really make sense for what you asked for. Can you tell us what's a better thing? You leave that with the manager in every single case. And you get more resources. Like I said, if the manager comes back with, hey, we originally thought we could do it, but now we just don't have enough time, we're going to have to shift this up next month or next quarter, you can come back and go, okay, well, are there any other resources? Like, since you have the budget for it, are you able to actually get someone to help me out with this? The other side of this is you can flag to the people who asked you to work on this product or feature and say, hey, I told this team we got agreement, but the resourcing is going down now. So now I could try to do all the chasing and the reviewing, but ideally they should have someone on their team to do this. So again, the onus doesn't become yours, it actually becomes that team's. And the most important thing is you see the entire forest. Rather than focusing on individual roadblocks, you have the ability to jump forward to go look at the next iteration of your MVP and actually build that dream house. Going into number 2, you don't want to be data obsessed. An example of this, and again, very frequently happens in product management, is you discover a data gap. You find out one piece of data that's pretty critical to your plans, and you just don't have it. Or it's there, but it's not very usable. So you discover a data gap and you rope in the miscellaneous stakeholders that are involved with that piece of data, and you attempt to resolve it. What actually happens is you find out that the experts are all gone. So the people who actually implemented that tracking to understand that data, they're not there anymore. Or the people who actually requested it in the first place, they're not there anymore. Or they forgot how they actually requested in the first place. So you actually have a very big gap in not just the data itself, but all the background behind that data. And also because you usually was implemented quite a while ago, and all that tracking was implemented when like the first software first launched or the service was first available, it means that you're on version 1, but the latest version is actually version 10. So all of the things that could actually instantly benefit you isn't immediately available. And to actually get that work up and running, you'll actually have to reach out to a variety of teams who will then have to work in unison to try to get that to version 10. So it's endless coordination between teams. As a real life example, data is basically 3 things. It's hunting, it's cleaning, and it's cooking. And I'll go into detail about each. So as I mentioned, if you're missing a piece of data, you look for that data. So there's a great deal of hunting, finding the piece of data or the data points that you want. And then in order to actually use those data points, you have to make sure they're reliable, because you don't want to come up with a report of this is what our company should do, or this is what our organization should do, when it turns out the data is flawed. Like you'll find out in the point of cleaning that there's a variety of reasons why from this date to this date, there's no data, or from this date to this date, the data changed, or from this date to this date, all of it says null or not available. And there's a lot of cleaning involved. And then once you get everything in order, you actually cook that data and you provide that prescription of, here, this is the trend data that we see, or here, this is the things that we should be doing because this is what the data says. And that's what happens in real life. You just end up hunting and cleaning all the time, and you get very little cooking done. So don't be data obsessed, instead be data diligent. And let me go into a little more detail about being data diligent. You'll hear a lot of companies talk about being obsessed with data and collecting all the data possible. The reality is there's an endless trove of data, and not all of it's clean. By the time you clean it, which could be quarters, years, possibly decades, you end up with a lot of data that nobody really knows how to use. And like I said, you can try to rope in the original people who put it in, you can try to update to the latest versions, but there are massive downstream impacts, and those downstream impacts typically prevent you from moving forward. Instead, I suggest that you hunt what you can taste. And what I mean by that is, if you have a data set that your company is currently using, no matter how small it is, use that first and just increment from that. Even though there's a much more important piece of data that you need, just link it to what you have. And the company maybe reports in their annual reports to their shareholders, or just uses internally on a constant basis. Believe in that base data and increment from there. and also clean the data that smells right. And what I mean by that is it doesn't take that much effort to just see if there's any data gaps, meaning, like I mentioned, if you look at the dates and some of the data is missing, you have some not available or some nulls, that should be your red flag already to probably stop trying to link this data to anything else. As I mentioned before, if your company is using any piece of data, they typically won't have nulls, they typically won't have blanks in those pieces of data. Go with those first. And basically cook with what little you have first. Even though hunting a massive deer, which could be your deer data, would be really valuable to your organization, getting 5 or 6 mushrooms is a lot easier to find and a lot easier to confirm. While checking to see if a deer is infected with some sort of disease, it's probably gonna take a lot more effort. So follow with what you can see, easily get in hand, and just move forward with that. And the result of this is prescriptive data that incrementally gets better. As I mentioned, if you're using what your company is already using or organization is already using, and just increment on that, add another field to that, or add another piece of data to that, it becomes a lot easier than finding a completely new piece of data that your company hasn't been tracking today. And one thing you'll also find from this is that you're going to have to accept duplicates. There's always this focus on having one source of truth, and that really makes sense from an engineering and architectural perspective. But realistically, if you need to move forward to find your data, you will always be stuck with, well, that's not in our source of truth, so we're going to have to add this and then migrate all this data. It's going to take quite a while. The alternative to that is you build a new database, you duplicate some of the existing data, but again, you increment. So at some point, you can migrate all of your old data to your new data, or vice versa, take your new data and migrate back to the old data. But I would just recommend you duplicate in the meantime until you actually get what you need. That brings us to the last one. Don't be stubborn. So again, sounds very usual for product management, but people spend a long amount of time trying to become the expert of X. And out of goodwill or bad will, it just ends up happening that you become the expert of X, and as a result, there are a lot of people who disagree with you, data may disagree with you, or other people externally, customers may even disagree with you. You may have done a couple of interviews and found out that, oh, customers actually don't think that's valuable, even though you have other data points that prove completely the opposite. And basically they're highlighting an edge case. The data or the people are highlighting an edge case. And being, again, some people tend to be one of the three or all of the three, being a micromanager, you're going, well, I can mitigate that. I'll figure that out myself, or I still need to move forward, so I'm going to make a decision on this. And you end up sweeping that edge case under the carpet to focus on some other time because you had to cut scope. The result is a firestorm that results in a lot of CYA. And it basically shifts your roadmap. You move all of your deadlines even farther out because that edge case turns out to be a massive case. And that massive case ends up taking up all your cycles trying to resolve that before you can even launch the next iteration of your MVP. In a real life example, on a micro, looking at it from two facets, on a micro level, I've personally never had this issue because I was doing number one quite often. I was a micromanager. I always made sure that every single possibility, anything that was being flagged was being resolved. I was constantly chasing, constantly reviewing, constantly making backup plans. And this was burning me out in every single sense of the word. On a macro level, this happened quite often, but I was pretty used to it, which is your org structure changes or your product mandate changes or the company refocuses on new KPIs. This happens pretty often. So by being stubborn and saying, okay, I'm only going to do this type of product and I'm only going to work on this type of product, that doesn't really help your organization and also leaves you pretty much stuck when the company moves forward or changes. So don't be stubborn, instead be openly opinionated. And this is extremely important from a variety of reasons. The best way to describe this is at the end of the day, product management is delivering results and delivering the goals of a company or organization. But the most important thing is also realizing that there is a large variety of marketing that's involved. Even though you're delivering the KPIs or the goals, not everyone sees all of the pieces of work that you're doing. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of chasing, there's a lot of reviewing, there's a lot of advising, but all of that is just the result. When they see the result, they're like, oh, the revenue went up by this, or users are more engaged, or we sold more of this product. That's great. But people don't actually realize all of the other pieces of work that went into that, and that actually doesn't give you much service. So from a micro perspective, you need to have a consistent message, just like a marketer would, meaning you're constantly delivering the same message to every single stakeholder. Like I said, you want to reframe your product or your goal, your feature to each business unit or each department, but your consistent message should be the same. Just like marketers will sell the same brand image or the same messaging tone, that's what you do with your messaging for what you want to do with your product. This also saves you time in the long run. And I'll explain a little more details about that. From a macro perspective, you want to adjust for your market. Like I said, you're going to reframe your product or your features, but the most important thing is you can't expect to sell McDonald's in the US the same way you would sell it in Japan or France or Germany. There's going to be different products. There's going to be different toppings or flavorings or seasonings. Everything tries to remain the same as possible, but you need to adjust for your market. And to help you with this, you always have to think about your cadence, how often and how frequent you're messaging your stakeholders and making them aware of your consistent message. And then also adjusting your audience as you discover new stakeholders. The result of this is you end up mitigating a lot of risk or accepting a lot of the risk. So because you're sending out the same consistent message on a constant basis, all of the people you've delegated to, those team managers or those leaders, they will be able to actually go, what would this person think? And what would this person react to if I flag this to them? Because you're saying the same thing over and over and over, what ends up happening is they realize, well, if I flag this to them, they're not going to fix it unless I do this. So they'll actually fix that second part for you and then flag it to you, or then bring it to your attention of, hey, we've tried to do all these things. We still didn't have any success. We need your help now. So that, again, that saves you time in the long run. And it's much more efficient use of your time when everyone basically is working with you and for you prior to even flagging to you that there is a problem. And the most important thing of all this is that you're constantly growing. You're learning new perspectives. You're making sure those new perspectives are covered, and you're not actually putting out fires on a constant basis. So product management is an art, and product managers are basically artists. Your value, like I mentioned, the most important aspect that people typically look at is your impact. But your perception, your awareness are also very key to this. And those three aspects of being a micromanager or being too data obsessed prevent you from actually improving your perception or improving your awareness, because you're constantly either fighting fires or trying to find the perfect data trove. So be instead the coercively communal, data diligent, and openly opinionated. I'd like to thank you for joining my session and open a Q&A at this point. And if you want to learn more about me or connect, feel free to reach out to me on that bit.ly link.
Thanks so much, Pete. That was a very, really insightful presentation. And thanks for sharing your personal experience as well. So we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Well, to get us started, I'll go ahead and ask a question about how would you, using these 3 tips that you gave us, how would you recommend reaching out to customers and beginning to build relationships with that, for example, to a new product manager? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I was on mute. So are you talking about using these steps on customers? So I framed this from using on these internally, but yes, you can definitely use these on customers as well. From like the first one, if we just go back to this slide, the coercively communal aspect of things, even though you want to get lots of feedback from your customers and You want to understand what their needs are. You do also want to drive the conversation. If you ask every single customer what they want, they'll tell you something different, and you'll end up with no focus, which is very difficult to be successful. So you do want to be coercive in that aspect of driving the conversation to make sure that you're actually spending your 30 or 45 minutes with them to get the answers you need. You don't want to prime them for the wrong answer or the answer you want, but you definitely want to be pushing them to make sure that you're getting the answers that you need from each thing. From a data diligence perspective, like I said, there are always going to be customers that tell you about edge cases. You should just mark those edge cases down and be aware of them and just move on and find more data points that help to support those. And that actually leads to the last one, which is you want to be opinionated, but you need to be open. So if 3 customers come back with something out of the 50 customers you talk to about some edge case, you check your data to see if there's any data that corroborates that information. But if there is not, then you can just move forward. If there is some, then you can pivot and understand that, okay, maybe we should include that as part of our plans. So yes, all 3 of these can actually be applied to your customers as well.
So
I actually had a question. Go for it. Appreciate it. Honestly, thanks for walking through this. This is honestly super helpful and really good advice. I think one of the points you brought up about the data piece kind of spoke to me, because I think I have a bent for looking for data way too much, and I think that advice is really good. How do you balance having enough to kind of execute on what it is you're trying to do without, to your point, getting to the point to where you are cleaning the data, you are tracking it down, and you kind of get stuck in this cycle? Like, how do you determine, okay, I have enough to move forward, and kind of how are you kind of handling that yourself?
So I'm just going to jump back to the slide again. So I've again, this is why I said product managers won't tell you this, but all of them have been one of these 3 or all of these 3 at some point. And you realize that you just can't continue this because you'll burn out / you just won't get anything done. So to your point, finding that piece of data, like I mentioned, your organization or company or group already has some sort of data, and they use that in some sort of important report, either to your stakeholders, to the public, or to their customers. And those pieces of data have been vetted like many times. Otherwise, the entire company would have to just go into like fire mode just to make sure that the numbers are right. So 100% sure without any issues whatsoever, those pieces of data are correct. You want to just piggyback on those pieces of data. I'll just give you an example. If you know that you have 2 million customers coming to your site every month, then that's the number you start with. Now you want to know, out of those 2 million customers, how many of them actually come back a 3rd time or 4th time? Again, turns out to be really hard to do because somebody actually has to track that, and data gets mingled very quickly. So you actually might do something even easier. When is the last time they logged in? And then you can look at, from within that month, how many people have logged in that month, and then build on that data. So now that we've gotten 1 month of data, let's see if we can do 2 months of data, 3 months of data. Well, if you have 3 months of data, now you can see on a 3-month rolling cycle, how many users actually come back again, which is the same answer you actually wanted in the first place. So stick with what you know, like absolutely know, and everyone in the company is confident about, and then build on that. It's really hard for the obvious reasons, because the piece of data you want to know is how many active users are actually engaged with our product. Nobody seems to have it, but you do have how many people are coming to your site on a monthly basis. And again, used in stakeholder reports or stuff like that.
Thank you.
All right, well, we are just out of time. So thank you to everyone who joined us in the audience. And thank you so much, Pete, again, for a very great, insightful presentation that we can take and implement in our work. So be on the lookout for the recording in the community next week. And we will be live broadcasting this to the rest of the community at a later date. Thank you again so much, Pete. If you have any final words for aspiring product managers or existing product managers, you can leave us with that, and then we will close out.
Got it. Yeah, so just an ending. These 3 things seem really obvious. It's like, again, part of the frameworks or part of the work that you'll always see for product management. The most important thing is just not to get into that cycle. It's very easy to get stuck in the forest and not see all the woods. And you'll see individual trees and every single roadblock that blocks you from moving forward. as long as you can see always from a macro perspective or just where you're going, you'll always be able to move forward. So good luck.